Okay, who knows what an SJW is? Yes, go for it.
Oh, well, you know how there's extremists
Mm-hmm.
as conservative extremists. You have
Okay.
really radical views on the right side.
Radical views on the sides of what?
Radical views on the left side is what I
Okay.
describe as SJW.
Radical leftists.
Yes.
Okay. What is a radical rightist in this case?
I stopped keeping up with politics a while ago.
What's that?
I stopped keeping up with politics a while ago.
Okay.
But hardcore Christians sometimes.
Okay.
White heterosexual men who don't want to change.
White heterosexual men who don't want to change.
It's away from their power as white heterosexual men.
People that want to hoard all
Okay.
the money for themselves.
Social justice warriors.
Yes. Okay. Why are we talking about it today?
Because SJW is a word that gets thrown around a lot lately.
Mm-hmm. It does get thrown around a lot lately. We're talking about class, social, ethnic, and gender issues in technology because they're going to affect each and every one of us going forward. The internet is not an option anymore, it's a utility. And I would like you to imagine right now that your capacity to get electricity to your house was affected by the color of your skin or your gender, because that is what is happening right now in technology. Your capacity to have access to the best kinds of training in technology, to have access to voices, to community, those are affected by who you are, by your gender, your ethnic, your personal identities, by something called intersectionality. What is intersectionality? Anybody? Yes.
Well, let's see. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the correct term. But
It's okay if you don't get the correct term. I don't get the correct term half the time. I got to keep up with it, you know.
if you call yourself a feminist,
Okay.
you can't say you only want women that identify with their
Mhm.
genitals to be feminist. Like trans women can be feminists. Some
Yes.
person of color can be a feminist.
Mhm.
That's accepting everyone's intersectionality. So there's different sections. It's not just woman feminist.
Right.
It's more than that.
Well, it's not just about gender too. It's about the fact that there are multiple different identities that people have, and the question of how they intersect is the basis of intersectionality. So exactly what you just said. You don't have to just be a woman. You can have some other forms of identity as well. It's very common to bring up the issue of ethnicity plus gender as intersectionality, but there are a lot of other identities as well. A white male has the intersectional identity of white and male. Right? We're talking about the union of all of them. Think of the Venn diagram, basically. The reason we talk about this is because at the beginning of the class, I had to teach you all how, and some of you teach you more about how to get access to help on the internet, on places like Slashdot, on places like Stack Overflow. Your identity affects how much help and how much access you're going to have to knowledge, and that is disappointing and angry-making for me. As a hacker, I tend to try to find ways around things like that. Like, if someone doesn't like the fact that I'm female on Stack Overflow, I use a cartoon character instead. People will help a cartoon character if they won't help someone that looks like me on Stack Overflow. So that doesn't fix the problem, right? All it does is hide the number of people that have this different identity on a place where you're trying to get help. So the three things that we're going to talk about today are, what is this effect? How do you get around it? And then what can you do to help other people? Okay? So the first thing we should talk about is how you get access to help, how you get access to resources on the internet. What is this situation? I mentioned Stack Overflow. I've mentioned Slashdot. I've mentioned a couple of other sites as well. There is certainly a contingent on the site Reddit that will help you more or less based on who you are in terms of your intersectional identity. And yet these are sites that have the best information, the best access to information, and some of the best teachers on the internet. There is no doubt that Reddit is one of the greatest bases of knowledge and of super cute kitty pictures on the internet, right? So the fact that it's difficult to get access to these sites is problematic for a lot of people. Now, I don't think, and it's something that I've trained myself to do, I don't think you've ever heard me say a bad word about anybody's identity in this class. Okay, I don't like the Ku Klux Klan, but who does? I don't have position to criticize anybody for their identity. I want to try to find a way to make sure that everybody, regardless of identity, has equal access to the kind of knowledge base that's available on the internet. So the fact that that's not happening is disturbing to me. Who you are is going to matter a lot. And I'm going to bring up the issue of trans people in technology right now, because this is the part about how what you are matters for getting access to things. One of the things that I've noticed is that Facebook tends to be a really good platform for people to have groups and provide support for each other. I have a lot of trans friends on Facebook. For some reason, and this is just an interesting observation, I've seen there are a lot of sysadmins and people that work in network security and systems administration who are trans. I have no idea why, other than the fact that sheer competence will net you a job in that field, and no one cares at all what your identity is, so long as you can get the job done. You're by yourself basically all day long in a titanium silo of excellence anyway. So I find it very fascinating, and this is just an observation of mine. Go ahead.
As a sysadmin, is it
Mhm.
integral to the job to network with people in person and such?
Interestingly, it is not.
What?
That is a
Might
great
have to do
question.
with it.
What's that?
It might have to do with it.
I believe it does have to do with it. You face, I think, when you are alone behind your computer screen, you're going to face fewer penalties for whatever identity you have. It's one of the reasons you'll often find a crossover between hackers and sysadmins and how they look. Mohawks, piercings, total lack of care whatsoever about what other people think about their appearance, identity, because if you're good enough and you don't care about people, that's a great field to go into. I started there, right? So the problems happen, and this is where we get to that problem on the who you are level, when you want to be promoted out of that area of expertise. So if you want to not be a sysadmin, if you want to manage sysadmins, it starts to matter all of a sudden to the people that you have to meet with, who you are, what you look like, and that's when we start seeing some real problems. Not that there aren't problems getting into those positions, of course, to begin with, but that's when you start to see some real problems. The thing that I like to point out to people is that often we use a nebulous term in tech to promote people or hire people, and it's called culture fit. Culture fit covers a lot of different things. It covers whether or not someone seems to be on the same time schedule as everyone else, whether or not they seem to like the same things, if they like to bowl, if they're into My Little Ponies, if they know all the trivia from Star Trek The Next Generation, like me. It also covers racism and sexism. It covers a lot of really serious problems involving discrimination and bigotry. And the reason why is people don't necessarily understand or know on a subconscious level why they don't like somebody, right? If you don't have anything in common with someone, that's a real quick way to just start off prima facie, by default, not liking them or not having a reason to talk to them. So one of the reasons we talk about this now is I want to encourage each and every one of you to notice these things as they're happening, okay? Notice these things as you are hired into jobs, and try to make a little space for people that don't think the way you do. And the reason why is because it helps you build better product. I don't mouth about diversity because it's something I feel like I'm supposed to do or because I'm particularly altruistic. I'm not particularly altruistic, right? I do it because it matters to me to be efficient, and diversity is a more efficient answer to problem solving than homogeneity. Does this make sense? We've talked about this a lot before, and so I want to make sure that you all, as you're looking at the issue of who you are, that you make space for people that aren't like you. Not because it's the right thing to do, although it is, but because it helps you get work done faster and better, okay? It's great that it makes you feel good. That's swell and everything like that. But the reason we value people that don't think the way that we do is because they don't think the way that we do. They see different problems. They solve things differently. Now, we can always use gender and ethnicity and multitudes of other kinds of visible stimuli from the other person to tell that they've had a different existence, a different life than us. That's just a shortcut, a heuristic to telling whether or not they probably think differently than you do. There's a really great story, and this is the last of the who they are part of this, that I once heard. I used to work with the professor at University of Michigan who did the diversity studies and the discrimination studies after the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor was sued by a student who was not admitted based on what they called affirmative action quotas at the time. I don't know if any of you remember this. It was about 10 years ago. It was a very big deal in higher education that a school would be sued for the the horrible phrase lowering the bar to permit diversity candidates, and it's not lowering the frickin' bar. And so the law school was sued to provide access to this person who felt that he had been unfairly discriminated against. The professor that I worked with there at University of Michigan did the discrimination studies, the look to find out whether or not the bar was in fact lowered, second of all, whether or not it would provide a better educational experience, et cetera, et cetera. And he said the thing that was really interesting to him was they did their best to put together this 12-person committee to study this issue. And he was very surprised because the 12-person committee that they put together to study the issue came up with this totally perfect, no argument. They all completely agreed, had an immediate consensus on what the solution should be. And they were careful. They picked multiple identities. They picked people of color and women and LGBTQIA. They picked just about everybody they could think of. And yet this group as a whole came up with the exact same solution. No argument, no fighting, and it was an okay solution on how to handle admissions in future. Everyone was very surprised that they had all agreed so quickly. And then my professor came back to me and said, "Do you know what the problem was?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Every single one of them went to Harvard." They all thought the same because they'd all had very similar experiences to one another, regardless of the outside appearance. So don't forget that just because someone looks a little different than you do, that doesn't necessarily mean they've had different experiences. It's a good shortcut to make that assumption. It's not a bad shortcut to make the assumption that someone's had a different experience than you if they look very, very different than you. But don't forget that that's just an assumption. What lies underneath is what's interesting, and that's the real person. Does that make sense? Okay, so the last part is what you can do about this. Like I just said, the most important thing you can do is remember that the person that you're looking at is just a person. They may or may not have shared experiences with you, but the thing that you're looking for, the thing you want to find, is someone who adds to your experience, not fits within it. Does that make sense? What questions do you have about what you can do? Because I want to bring you into the discussion a little bit. I feel like this is something that is scary for people to ask questions about, and it's problematic. And if any of you want me to, you can come up to me later on and ask me questions in private. That's totally fine too. I'd love it if you'd ask me some questions about how to handle this going forward. What do you do? How will you try to make some space for add instead of fit in future?
Being yourself, I guess.
What's that?
Being yourself, if you're hard.
I like that. I like being yourself. That's always a good option. Beats beating anybody else. All right. What can you do when it comes to other people?
See their view.
See that they're real? Is that what you said?
See their view.
See their view. I like both of those. I like see their view and also see that they're real. Sometimes it's very easy to use the same assumption that someone has had a different experience than you to assume that you instantaneously know everything about them. They turned into this two-dimensional caricature, and you don't want that to happen either. It's okay to use your brain and try to figure out what is and isn't relevant about the person standing in front of you as long as you remember they're a person. I'm going to sit here until somebody asks me a smart question. Yes?
I just find it a little
Yeah?
confusing because you can't look at a person and
Mhm.
assume their life has been a certain way
Right.
based on what's on the surface. So I think
Agreed.
to assume that they have had, oppression based on looking at them is kind of racist.
Or assume that they haven't.
Or
Yeah,
assume that
or
they
to
haven't.
assume that they haven't.
Agreed.
So I think just approaching everyone like they're a human being is a good first step.
Approaching everyone like they're a human being is a very, very good first step. I was once given a fellowship for the National Science Foundation. I didn't feel I was the most qualified for it. It was in graduate school, in my PhD program. And I went to the professor who I knew had been instrumental in getting me this fellowship and said, "I don't understand why you gave me this. I'm not the most qualified person for this." And he said, "We wanted to make sure there were more women in the program this year." And I said, "But why wouldn't you give it to the most qualified person?" And he said, "What we did was we looked at where you'd been and where you'd gotten to. And we also use sometimes the external appearance of someone as a proxy for whether or not they could use extra help." And I said, "That is really sexist." And he said, "But you're in the program and you're a National Science Foundation fellow and you're doing amazing work. Where's the bad here?" Yeah.
Because even if it is beneficial,
Mhm.
It's still wrong to make assumptions.
Wrong or right is a question of morality and ethics. This is a question for me of what is useful.
Yes, I feel
Mhm.
like in the media
Yeah.
nowadays being different has blown itself up so much,
Mhm.
and there are so many people fighting on the same side for equality and
Mhm.
justice for everyone. That honestly, if I were 13 right now,
Mhm.
having the mind that I do, I would probably choose to be cis because there are so many different benefits out there right
Mhm.
now. And at 13, I was really selfish.
Mhm.
So I could see why anyone would want to just become trans when there are so many different different forms of assistance and ways to climb the ladder faster.
Ways to climb the ladder faster if you have one of those, what you
Yes.
might call a protected class or identity like that.
Yes.
That's something that's very understandable. I do see people, and I'm going to grab your question here in just one second. I do see people seeing the benefits that people have when they declare themselves to be of a protected class, and asking themselves, why don't I just do that to make it easier for myself? And what I do then is I like to look at the statistics. I like to ask myself, what do the numbers say about the experience of this protected class? Are they really helping themselves more, or are they, and I'm going to sound like I'm challenging you, but in fact I actually really understand where you're coming from on this. The average age of a transgender person at death in this country is 30. So let us not pretend that declaring yourself to be a trans person publicly does not come with some very severe disadvantages. There's never a way for us all to be perfectly alike each other, and one of the things we try to do is get to equality. Sometimes when someone has come from so far behind in what they've accomplished in their life and they've gotten to an amazing place, when someone's come from here and they've gotten to here, and someone else has gone from here to just a smidge higher than here, who's the person who's had the longer journey, who over time has accomplished more? And I tend to try to look at it that way. It's math in my head. I see the math, if that makes sense. So yes, there's always problems with the way that we address identity, with the way that we address who people are. But that's what that professor saw in me, and what I try to remember that someone is putting themselves in the way of when they openly declare their identity as someone who is of a protected class or who faces disadvantages. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is a hard topic to talk about.
No,
A really
I
hard
think
topic.
about it a lot,
Go.
So that's
Great.
I was just gonna mention, it
Mhm.
sounded like your professor, like when you
Mhm.
mentioned your first thought was that's sexist.
Yeah.
It sounded like his goal was to break that cycle of being
Mhm.
sexist, like put you on a pedestal, like look what you can accomplish and
Mhm.
inspire other people to do this, so that it becomes an equality.
Yes, that was absolutely his motivation. He absolutely wanted to just see a couple more women in the program. And did he use some of his power as undoubtedly a wealthy, rich, white, cis male to see me get a little more help than somebody else who maybe had more advantages than I did in that situation? I mean, this was a pretty wealthy school that I was at, right? And you don't want to know about my student loans. Many of the people that I was around don't have any. So yes, he used his capacity to help me in a way that I think was probably, in the way that you define it, unfair. But when you look at the statistics,
It's emotion-based and not logic-based.
well, it's not necessarily emotion and not logic-based. I understand what you mean by that, but what I care about is the statistics and the trend. And if you all take a look at what the trend looks like for women, for diversity in technology, you can see right now that it is decreasing. It is not getting better. Okay? So whatever is happening right now isn't working. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. So one of the reasons why I have these conversations with you about identity and about who and what you are is to prepare you for the fact that there are problems in technology. And yet this is the biggest field and is going to continue to be the biggest and fastest growing field of endeavor in human existence for at least decades. This is where your career is going to be in some fashion or another. So get ready for it. And I have friends and mentors who have undoubtedly used their power on behalf of me to help me. And is it fair that they used it for me instead of someone else? Maybe someone who had accomplished just a little bit more, committed just a few more code changes, who had raised a little more money in a round, is that I don't know, I don't think it's fair, but I don't think fairness is necessarily always the thing we're going for. I think sometimes we're trying to just tip the scales a little bit to try to make life a little better for everybody in the situation, right? Sometimes fairness isn't all it's cracked up to be. I'm not really a fan of life being that fair anyway. I've not experienced much fairness. I've experienced advantage and disadvantage that averages out to 81 cents on the dollar. Right? Yes.
Until I started this class, I actually didn't think that women in technology was actually a difficult thing. I actually
Really?
thought that it was more popular than men. Because
Really?
like, when I look at this class compared to like my class in high school of tech, 45% of this class is women.
Absolutely. How many, did I already explain to you all what the attrition rate for women in technology is?
The what rate?
The attrition rate. About 5 years from now, half of you women will not be in technology, and the number will increase. Over time, what happens is women drop out at twice the rate of men in technology. And that's just what happens. When you get to the C-suite, there are almost no women. When you get to the VP level, there just aren't any. And that happens because technology has a false meritocracy built into it, where we assume that someone who can get the job done fastest is probably, at least to some extent done well, is probably the best at the job, without necessarily understanding that we are, as a society, especially with the lack of paid family leave, causing a very serious burden on people who statistically are more likely to be primary caregivers. That's really where a lot of the problems come from in your mid-career. If you're ready for that, if you prep for that, if you find a way around that, you're going to be good to go. That's the really big one, is primary caregiving, especially when you're female. That's probably the hugest reason why women drop out. And I mean, I've got the numbers to back that up, but I can't give you the specific split on the ratio right now. Does that make sense? Okay. It kind of sucks. I get it. I absolutely get it. The thing that you do is you look for mentors, and don't forget, just because they don't look like you doesn't mean they can't mentor you. My mentors are older, rich, white, cis, straight men, because they're all CEOs or C-suite, or they've accomplished a great deal in technology and startups and entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial work. There aren't enough women to go around at that high level to give me mentorship. But these men, while occasionally I have to explain a couple things to them, will absolutely champion me. And they give me a leg up. Is it fair? Probably not. But they like me and I like them. And they're doing their best to make up for what they see as some advantages that they have had that I didn't have. Fair enough? This is not easy. There's no right or wrong answer here. I tend to care more about what's effective in this case than right or wrong, because what I see as right or wrong, we're failing as an industry. So that's just where we end up at. And I've got the death of 1,000 cuts story for every moment I've been in technology. Everybody that I know who has a protected identity or protected class identity does. I mean, every single time I walk into a startup pitch meeting and I see that a black woman walks into the room and she's asked to go get donuts instead of asked to take her seat where she's going to be pitching, because everyone assumes she's the receptionist. That happens again and again. And the only thing that you can do about that is acknowledge the lack of fairness and do your best to advocate for people who you want to see succeed and who you think may not have had as easy a time as you. And everybody in here has got disadvantages. Everybody in here has got advantages other people don't have. I have a great conversation every once in a while with a really good friend of mine. He is the straightest, super whitest guy you can seriously, we are talking like Iowa corn-fed boy all the way down. It's my friend in Eastern Washington. So Eastern Washington corn-fed boy. And we have this great conversation. He's like, man, I grew up in a trailer park. I don't understand why people are complaining about my identity and my advantages. I had to work for every single thing that I have. And I'm like, yes, you did. There are pieces of your identity that especially with an issue of economics, are way harder for you to overcome than a black woman who was born into extreme privilege and went to boarding school. There's going to be stuff in her life that she's able to do that you're not ever able to do. And yet, there's going to be pieces of her identity that are always going to be a problem in a traffic stop that you don't have, right? So, look, we can keep talking about it, but the main thing that I'm glad about is just you're aware that there's an issue and you've got at least some tools now to try to combat it. And again, I'm never going to proclaim that I'm right on all this. All I know is what's effective. Mentorship is effective. Acknowledging that other people are people, and that while you can probably make a couple of assumptions about the fact that someone may have had a different experience than you based on your visual observation of them, remember that they're a human being and look for what's happening deeper. What you're looking for is people who think differently than you so that you can do a better job, right? Also, it makes your mind a better place. When you talk to people who think differently than you, it makes you more interesting. Everyone's got disadvantages. Everyone has advantages. I'm restraining myself about joking about the presidential candidates right at the moment. Just want you to know that right now. I'm being so good right now. It's not even happening. I mean, the line is right there. It's not happening. Any last questions? Anything that you want to know about? Okay.
Is it truly,
Yes, okay.
like, declining?